Hello everyone. Today in this video we are going to study about excess bone. Now what is excess bone, where it is located, how it looks like, what are its processes and all. Let me tell you all about it. Axis is the second cervical vertebra. You know we have a vertebral column in our back or in the dorsal end of an animal. That particular vertebral column has different sections. The most anterior, or we can say yes, the most cranial structure of the vertebral column, which contains generally 7 or more than 7 bones, is known as cervical region. In that cervical region, the second vertebra is known as axis bone. So axis bone is the second cervical vertebra present in the vertebral column. So this is its dorsal surface. You can recognize this is the dorsal surface of axis of a horse. When we will complete this video, you will be you will be able to differentiate how it is the axis of a horse and what are its constituents. Now this is the ventral surface of axis, this is the posterior surface, and this is the anterior surface. So let's start about the axis bone. So axis bone is the longest of the vertebra. Now what it means? It means that if we will talk about the longness of the bone, how much the bone is long, or which vertebra is the longest, so the first name comes to it is axis bone. Why it is long? Because of the odontoid process. You can see in this diagram, this is the odontoid process which makes this axis bone the largest vertebra. It is a atypical bone. Now why axis is a atypical bone? See, a typical bone is that bone which contains a body, a neural arc, as well as processes, prominent processes, a good neural arc, and body. But in case of this axis and atlas, they don't have all these structures. There are some variation to these structures. Okay. Now the anterior end possess spout shape. Now what is this anterior end? The cranial end of the axis bone has a spout shaped process. You can see it is a spout shaped process, and this spout shaped process, which also make the axis bone the longest bone, is known as odontoid process. What is this odontoid process? It is the process which is spout shape and which originates from the cranial end, or we can say the anterior end of axis bone. Now this odontoid process is also known as dens. You can see here it is dens. This is the odontoid process in the vertebral column. This is also known as dens, and this dens is 2 centimeter in length. How much is its length? It is 2 centimeter. Now in the dorsal end it is concave. You can see this is the dorsal end, here it is concave. It has a depression here, and in the ventral end it is convex. Okay, and in the dorsal end there are some ligaments which are joined to it, and that ligaments are known as odontoid ligaments. And in the ventral surface, ventral surface of dens do, it articulates with the axis bone, sorry, with the atlas bone. So the odontoid process of atlas bone joins with the axis bone in the region of fovea dentis, as we studied in the last video, that atlas bone has something rough surfaces on its posterior end, in the posterior vertebral foramen, which is known as fovea dentis. In that fovea dentis, this particular region of the axis bone get joined to make a synovial joint there. Okay, and on either sides of this odontoid process we have some modified articular or oblique processes which are continued with this odontoid process. You can see this is a articular plate, a modified articular processes. This is a modified articular plate which also joins with the posterior articular process of the axis bone, as it is written here. These articular processes or articular plate joins with the posterior articular surface of atlas bone. Now this axis bone also has posterior oblique processes which are placed posterior laterally, like this is the posterior end, and they are posterior laterally. You can see these are present posterior laterally. This is the posterior surface of a axis bone. As you see, this is the body which is concave, and these are the posterior lateral articular processes, and they are above this vertebral foramen. Now, in case of ruminants and pigs, if we will talk about ruminants and pig, these processes are independent from the spine, the dorsal spine. They do not articulate with this spine. But in case of carnivores and horses, these processes are joined, like I told you in this particular diagram. You can see this is the dorsal spine, and these are the posterior lateral articular processes, which are not independent. They are joined with this dorsal spine. But in case of ruminants and pigs, these processes are independent, like you can see here. Now, in the posterior extremity, there is a lateral foramen. This is the posterior extremity where the third cervical vertebra will get joined. Here we can find a foramen. This is the whole kind of a thing, and it is known as lateral foramen or intervertebral foramen also, but commonly we say it a lateral foramen. This is for the passage of second cervical spinal nerve, passes from this lateral foramen. Now, there is no anterior articular process, but there is an anterior articular plate, like this plate. Okay. Now, let me talk about the transverse processes. These transverse processes are the processes which starts in the transverse region, like this. These are the transverse processes. So these transverse processes are small, as I showed in the diagram. They are undivided. That means there is no division of the transverse processes, and they are projected backwards. Now let me tell you something about foramen transversarium. What is this foramen transversarium? If I will talk about the transverse processes, like these are the transverse processes. This foramen transversarium originates from the base of these transverse processes. Like I will make you understood from the diagram that these are the transverse processes. Like this was the lateral foramen. These are the transverse processes. Okay. These are the transverse processes. This one. Why? Because they are originating from the transverse end. I think I told you wrong that this was intervertebral foramen, but this is intervertebral foramen or lateral foramen, but this is transverse foramen transversarium. Now, how you will differentiate between transverse foramen transversarium and lateral foramen? The foramen transversarium will originates from the root of transverse process, but this intervertebral foramen or lateral foramen would be present on the anterior side, and this would be on the posterior side. Now, in this foramen transversarium here, vertebral artery passes. Okay. So we have two spines. In the dorsal end, we have this dorsal spinous process, and in the ventral, we have this ventral spinous process. You can see the summit, the topmost point of this dorsal spinous process is narrow, and its anterior side is thick. That means this side is thick. You can see it is thick on the it is thin in the anterior side and thick in the posterior side, as you can also see in this diagram here. The anterior side of the summit is thin and posterior side is thick. Now, summit of axis gives attachment to ligament nuclei. Like in the neck region, you will find some ligaments. These ligaments are the origination of ligament nuclei. Like from here, ligament nuclei originates or it gets joined with the axis bone. Now let me tell you about the species difference. Now in case of horse, this odontoid process is conical. You can see it is cone shaped. In the anterior end, the process which comes is conical. It is cone shaped. And anterior extremity presents saddle shaped articular area. You can see these are saddle shaped articular area. As in case of ox, you saw anterior articular plate like processes. Like this was a plane, or we can say it was plane, but in case of horse, it is saddle shaped. Lateral foramen is oval. What is this? What was this lateral foramen? This was the lateral foramen or intervertebral foramen. In case of horse, this lateral foramen is oval in shape, more like egg. The spine is massive and divides posteriorly into two ridges. You can see also here the dorsal spinous process divides into two ridges. As you can see in the diagram, which terminates in the articular process. As below them there would be some articular processes. Now in case of dog, odontoid process is rod like. You can see this is rod like, and it extends up to occipital bone. Okay, this odontoid process extend up to occipital bone. Now it has some anterior articulating processes which are condyloid. That means there are some condyles shape, and they are oblique also. Okay, spine, the spine here na, overhang dorsal of atlas. That means it overhangs towards atlas bone. So it is a kind of difference which you can see in dog. This dorsal spinous process overhangs to the atlas bone, and it possesses tubercle posteriorly. You can see in the posterior and it is a tubercle which is present, a slight hill like thing. In case of poultry, we will discuss in the new videos, like you can see it's a different kind of excess bone. And in case of pig, you will find the odontoid process is in the cylindrical form. Okay, so this was the species difference and all about the excess bone. Thanks.